Well, good morning, Journey. Welcome to worship. We're so glad that you are here in person and online. If you are a guest, we're so glad that you're here. Please make sure that you stop by the front desk. We would love to just tell you about all the great things that we have going on here at church, and we also have a gift for you. Well, we're going to get started with worship, and we have a new song for you, so let's stand and sing together.
I can see the clouds rolling. I can feel the winds, they try to shake me. I will not be moved. My feet are on the rock. I can feel the waters rise. I can hear the howling lights that haunt me. Fear won't hold me down. My feet are on the rock. When I feel my heart about to break, I will cling to your unchanging grace. Let the waters come and the earth give way. I'll be dancing in the rain. My feet are on the rock. I can see the morning light. I can feel the joy on the horizon. Here my faith is found. I stand on solid ground. When I feel my heart about to break, I will cling to your unchanging grace. Let the waters come and the earth give way. I'll be dancing in the rain. My feet are on the rock. On Christ the solid rock I stand, under the ground is sinking sand. So stomp your feet and clap your hands, our feet are on the rock. On Christ the solid rock I stand, all of the ground is sinking sand. So stomp your feet and clap your hands, our feet are on the rock. On Christ the solid rock I stand, all of the ground is sinking sand. So stomp your feet and clap your hands, our feet are on the rock. When I feel my hope about to break, I will cling to your unchanging grace. Let the waters come and the earth give way. I'll be dancing in the rain. When I feel my hope about to break, I will cling to your unchanging grace. Let the waters come and the earth give way. I'll be dancing in the rain. My feet are on the rock. Ooh. My feet are on the rock. Ooh. My feet are on the rock.
Why don't you take a moment, say hello to someone around you, and then we have some announcements for you.
Hi.
Good morning, Journey. We're so glad you're with us today, whether you're here in person or worshiping online, watching from your phone, your computer. We're just glad to be together today, and we got some information that you need to know. Parents, if you have a kid in our children's ministry, we have an event happening today, this afternoon, called Always, for our preschool through kindergarten age groups. If you have any questions about that, you can see Kira out at the welcome desk. Also coming up for our children's ministry, on October 2nd, we have an event called Cliffhanger for our 1st through 5th graders. If you need more information about that, you can find it on the Journey app. This Saturday is Fall Fest. We are so excited, but we still need volunteers, and we still need you to invite everybody you know to come out. We have food trucks, we have vendors, we have games, fun for the entire family. We hope to see you there this Saturday from 4 to 7 p.m. at First Street Park. Finally, if you're a first-time guest with us here today, welcome. We're so glad you're here. We have a free gift for you at the welcome desk just for joining us today. For everything else happening at Journey, you can find it on the Journey app. Thanks for being here. Enjoy the rest of the service.
I forget that was coming. So we are so glad you guys are here with us today. It has been a crazy 48 hours for me. I talked a couple weeks ago about how tired I was. I am more tired today. We flew in from Guatemala on Friday night about 11 o'clock. And then yesterday I had to get up and coach 2 soccer games, one of them at 9 and one at 2. I had to run a bunch of miles in between because I got a race coming up. And then last night I went and saw Pearl Jam and didn't get in until 1 a.m. And so I am tired. And so today is brought to you by Red Bull. And that's true. I don't drink them often. Everybody after first service was like, you shouldn't drink those. And I'm like, I know, but I needed one today. And so I am super excited to be here with you guys and be back from Guatemala and to tell you about all the stuff going on. We'll talk about that more here in a few weeks. A couple things coming up that you know about that is there were more kids that we need to sponsor, and we'll talk more about that probably in January. But also, the country is opening up just kind of like it did here after COVID. And so we're planning on taking trips next summer. So you guys are more than welcome. We'll take a trip probably every year down there. It is becoming one of my favorite places to be. It's just like a second home to me, and I love it. And I want you guys to experience everything that we get to experience down there. We talked about Fall Fest. It's next week. It's not in our parking lot this year. It's across the park. We have the whole park reserved. You can park in our parking lot or the parking lot right next door over there by First Street Park. But we want you to invite everybody. If you don't know what Fall Fest is, it's a festival that we put on for our community. There'll be food trucks, vendors, all that stuff. And so the church puts it on, but it's really a community festival. And so we hope you guys will be there. Just know if you've never been, it's big. We usually have around 3,000 people show up for this thing. And so we want you and your friends and family to be there with us as well. So this week we are moving on in our series about mountains. And we're kind of changing themes a little bit this week. Last week we talked about the idea that God is wanting to move us forward. And so this week we're going to kind of take a look at what that kind of looks like for some of us. And so in Matthew, you guys hear that? All right. If you're in the band, there's something ticking on the stage. I don't know what it is. So welcome to Journey, where something always goes wrong. So anyway, so I can beat. I'm going to preach to that rhythm. All right. So in Matthew chapter 16, Jesus is talking to his disciples, and he takes them onto this mountain. And here's what he says to them. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" "Well," they replied, "some say John the Baptist, some say Elijah, and others say Jeremiah or one of the prophets." But then he asked them, "But who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And Jesus replied, "You are blessed, Simon, son of John, because my Father in heaven has revealed this to you. You did not learn this from any human being. Now I say to you, are Peter," which means rock, "and upon this rock I will build my church, and all the powers of hell will not conquer it." So in this kind of teaching, here's kind of what Jesus is saying, and kind of the important part. He's kind of setting the stage, and he's asking the disciples, like, of all of the things that people say about me, and all of the things that I've done, and I've done a lot, and I've said a lot, the most important thing to focus on is, who do you actually say that I am? Who do you say I am? Not who do your grandparents say I am? Not who do your parents say that I am? Not who did your preacher growing up say that I am? No, who do you say that I am? And this is the question that we all have to wrestle with. This is the thing we all have to decide for ourselves. It can't even be what I say he is. It has to be, who do you say that I am? Who do you believe Jesus to be? Who do you say that he is? And upon that thing, he's going to build his church. Upon this truth, upon this idea, he's going to say who he is. And so what he wants us to believe is that he is the Messiah, the Son of the living God, and that everything is possible through him and with him. That all of the powers of evil that are in this world, all of the powers of darkness, all of the powers of human greed and hate and violence, no matter how, y'all hear that? I don't know what that is. We're just going to make it awkward for a second. This is Justin. Give it up for Justin. Yay!
It's a metronome setting.
Okay. If you're a visitor, this happens a lot, so we're just used to it. So there we go. All right. There we go. Yay for Justin. Good job. All right. So can you interpret for me what I'm doing? Yeah, hand motions. So what he's saying is that no matter what we face in life, the belief is that he can overcome it. And this is what we have to decide as people. And 2,000 years later, the question still arises to us, do we believe this? Now, what we have to understand about the journey of faith that they experienced and that we experienced is it won't always be easy. There will be hardships. There will be setbacks. There will be pain and tears along the way. It was true of them. It will be true of us. But can we hold on to that truth and on to that promise of who he is and what he says he can do and what he will actually do? Now, one of the things I find most fascinating about this story we're going to look at today is the way that we still, thousands of years later, can connect to this story and relate to the principles we're going to learn in this story. Now, this story takes place in Numbers chapter 13, so that's in the Old Testament. So what you need to know about this part of the story is it's a fascinating story, but like it's one of these books of the Bible. Now, if you've ever read like one of those read through the Bible plans for a year and you get into Numbers and Leviticus, you're like, I ain't doing this no more, right? It just gets a lot, but this story takes place within that, and it's this fascinating story. And what's happening in this story is we're kind of building upon our story last week with Moses. So Moses, the people are now rescued. They're wandering around. They're looking for this promised land that God has promised them. And they're on the precipice of taking it over. Like they're on the cusp of actually going into the promised land. They know where it is now. And so Moses sends in these spies to go into the land to see what it's like. Because if we're going to go in and we're going to take this land that's been promised, we want to know what we're up against. And so he sends 12 men into the land to kind of check it out. And here's where this story takes place. In Numbers 13, it says this. After exploring the land for 40 days, the men returned to Moses, Aaron, and the whole community of Israel at Kadesh in the wilderness of Paran. So they're still kind of waiting. There's this big camp of people waiting to take this land. They reported to the whole community what they had seen and showed them the fruit they had taken from the land. And this is what they say to the people. We entered the land you sent us to explore, and it is indeed a bountiful country, a land flowing with milk and honey, and here is the fruit it produces. Now, you got to understand, when they hear this, they've been wandering around in the desert and now the wilderness for a long period of time where food was hard to come by. God has given them and provided for them, but now they're talking about a land where you don't have to worry. All of your needs are going to be met. Look at the fruit. You don't have to go search for it anymore. It's just there for the taking. But the people living there are powerful, and their towns are large and fortified. We even saw giants there, the descendants of Anak. And so listen, it's everything that God promised, and it's right there. The problem is we don't think we can take it. The problem is it seems like it might be a little much for us. The promise is here we are out here with our sticks and our rocks, and we're about to take on a village, an army, a building, a fortress, and there's even giants there. We're small compared to them. We're weak compared to them. We cannot do this. But there's one man in the crowd, Caleb, and here's what he says. But Caleb tried to quiet the people as they stood before Moses. Let's go at once. Let's not wait. Okay? Verse 30. Let's not wait. Let's go at once to take the land. We can certainly conquer it. But the other men who had explored the land with him disagreed. We can't go against them. They are stronger than we are. So the spread of this bad report about the land among the Israelites, the land we traveled through and explored, will devour anyone who goes to live there. All the people we saw were huge. We even saw giants there, the descendants of Anak. Next to them, we felt like grasshoppers, and that's what they thought too. And so there's been this promise of God, and they're on the verge of this promise of God, but it seems like it might be a little tough, a little hard. And so here's the problem. We don't think we can do it. And these men, they start to spread this around the people. Isn't it fascinating that whenever something comes up, an opportunity in life, it only takes a few people that are negative to kind of tarnish the whole thing? It only takes a few to sour the whole things. And these men, they don't believe that they can overtake these people. They don't believe that even though God has promised this, that it's something that we can do. And here's the thing you have to learn. If you don't believe you can do something, you will prove it 100% of the time. And they don't believe they can do it. It seems like it's too much. And so here they are, promised land, but it seems out of reach. Now, what's fascinating to me is how it relates to us is sometimes in life we get upset because God doesn't do what we think God should do. And some of the time that is because we believe in things that he actually hasn't promised. He never promised it wouldn't be hard. He never promised it wouldn't be difficult. He didn't promise there wouldn't be hardships along the way. He never even promised that we wouldn't have to face giants or mountains that we may have to overtake. But in this story, this is something that God has promised. This is something that he told them. He did not rescue them out of Egypt to bring them to this point for the story to end. And Caleb's sitting there and he knows this and he's going, look, we can do this. But in the eyes of the people, it seems too much. And so the question for us is, have you ever faced something that just seems too much? Have you ever faced something that as you look up at it, as you look at the mountain, as you look at the giant that's standing before you, you say, I just don't think I can do this. And so this message starts to spread amongst the people. And now it's not just these few guys that don't think they can do it. And now this negativity, now this lack of faith, this lack of belief, it spreads amongst everybody. Listen to what it says in 14, verse 1. Then the whole community began weeping aloud, and they cried all night. Their voices rose in a great chorus of protest against Moses and Aaron. And here's what they say. If only we had died in Egypt, or even here in the wilderness, they complained. Like drama queens, right? A little too much, right? Like if we just been dead, it'd be better, right? Why is the Lord taking us to this country only to have us die in battle? Our wives and little ones will be carried off as plunder. Wouldn't it be better for us to return to Egypt? Wouldn't it be better for us to go back to the place where just a few years ago we were crying out so loud that God heard our cries? Isn't it interesting that as we face new obstacles, sometimes we're more attracted to the past? And it's like this thing where we talked about last week. Sometimes the reason we can't move forward is because we're still fighting ancient battles. This isn't the first time this has happened. This has happened before in their journey. And what's amazing is time and time again, up until this point along the journey, not only rescuing them from Egypt, but everything they faced in the wilderness and in the desert, time and time again, God has brought them through. And yet here they go. They face another giant, another obstacle. They face another challenge. What I find fascinating about them, but also about us, and I'm guilty of this too, is whenever we face something, whatever it is in front of us, our world just shrinks down to the size of that thing. It's like our blinders go on and all we can see is that. We cannot see all of the things that God has already brought us through, and we cannot see all of the infinite possibility that could be before us. All we see is that. And you know what's fascinating about our faith in God? Our God shrinks down to the size of that, doesn't it? And now, no matter how much we would have said 2 weeks ago or 2 months ago or 6 months ago, no matter how big of a song we would have sang about how big and how great and how mighty our God is, all of a sudden we're facing a new challenge, a new problem, and all of a sudden everything, including God, shrinks down to the size of that thing. And then in verse 4 it says this, after everything that Moses has brought them through, then they plotted amongst themselves, let's choose a new leader and go back to Egypt. Let's go back. They believe that what they're about to face is more impossible and harder, ready, than slavery. And it's a misunderstanding and a misrepresentative and a misremembering of the way things used to be. They've forgotten what God has done and what God could do. And so do we. And so Joshua and Caleb, these two guys that went with the other 10, but they have a dramatically different approach. And so listen to what they say. Joshua, son of Nun, and Caleb, son of, I can't even say that guy's name. Sometimes the Bible names, I've got a master's degree in theology, and it's just too much. All right? We're among those who had explored the land. This is verse 6. Should come up on the screen. Tore their clothes, and the land said to the entire Israelite assembly, the land we passed through and explored is exceedingly good. It's not what you've heard. If the Lord is pleased with us, he will lead us into that land, a land flowing with milk and honey, and he will give it to us. Do not rebel against the Lord, and do not be afraid of the people of the land, because we will devour them. Their protection is gone. The Lord is with us. Don't be afraid. And it's like this reminder of these two guys, and they're like speaking. And so here's what happens sometimes. When we're facing things, listen, there are people along the way that are trying to encourage us, people trying to remind us. But here's the thing. It was true of them and it's true of us. We don't want to hear it. You ever been there? Listen, I know what you're saying is probably true, but I don't want to hear that right now. Because all I see is this. And it's in this part of the story that God gets involved. And what's fascinating is we don't see a lot of this where God directly gets involved and speaks until later in the prophets. But in this part of the story, like God's going to speak to the people. And what I found fascinating about this section and what he's going to say is, see, when we're facing hardship, we only see it from our perspective. And so when we feel like God isn't coming through, or God's brought us to something that's too big of a challenge, or something that's going to devour us and destroy us, when we do you know what we do? All we do is want to say, well, listen, it's God's fault. Why did God bring us here? Why did God allow this? Why did God do this? And we never think about how God might feel in this moment. And so for a moment, we get this glimpse into sometimes maybe how God thinks when we're here. And here's what he says. Verse 11. And the Lord said to Moses, how long? You ever been somewhere and you say, how long do I have to go through this? How long do I have to deal with this? Now listen to God. How long will these people treat me with contempt? Will they never believe me? It doesn't matter that he's already brought you through all of this. Will you never believe him? Even after all the miraculous signs I have done among them. And here's where I think God might be speaking to us. Will you just believe me for once? Will you just trust me? Will you just believe that there's a possibility that I might be bigger than that giant, that I might be bigger than that mountain? Listen, I know that it's scary. I know that it's hard. I know that it's not always going to be easy. But would you believe just for a moment? Camped on the edge of the promised land, Moses sends 12 scouts to scope the land, and 10 of them come back with a negative report. But Joshua and Caleb, they kept their eyes squarely focused on God. Not on the obstacle, not on the land, not on the giants, but on God. They remembered all that God had brought them through, and rather than be distracted by all that looked impossible, they wanted to believe in the infinite possibility of what was possible. They could see it, they could feel it, they could taste it. They remembered what God had already brought them through. They weren't going to forget it. An important history lesson real quick. Let me ask you. Have you ever heard the names Shema, Shapdith, Igal, Palti, Gadiel, Gadi, Amamil, Sether, Nabi, or Guel? Have you ever heard those names? Yeah. Well, you've heard them because they're in the story. But have you ever heard anybody with that name? No. You've never heard of them before because they're forgotten. History is not often kind to those who cower in the face of adversity. It's those who see what could be and go ahead first into the storm. See, you've never heard the names of those guys. But let me ask you, do you know anybody named Caleb? Do you know anybody named Joshua? because they faced adversity. They faced an obstacle, and they believed. And now, thousands of years later, those names are still spoken, not only in these stories, but in names all across the world because of this moment. You never know what hangs in the balance of your choice. And let me remind you, in case you don't know, it is a choice to have faith. And not only is it a choice to have faith, it is a choice to act on that faith, even when it might seem easier not to. See, sometimes we all enter lands that are filled with giants and obstacles. We will all face terrain that seems impossible. We'll all face situations that we feel like if we step any further into this situation, it will devour us. Now, the sad part is of this story, if you know this story, is that the message continues to spread, not of Caleb and Joshua, but of these 10 spies. And negativity fills the minds of the people, and they believe that they cannot do this. Even after God speaks to them, they still don't have the faith to believe because their eyes are not set on God. Their eyes are set on the obstacle. And so for 45 years. Now, I say that because here, let me remind you. See, some of us, we want to believe in faith as long as it's like faith that happens in like 48 hours, right? Like I need resolve quick. And when we don't get resolve in the time frame that we think God should resolve this in, then we start to doubt again, right? So let me remind you, for 45 years, that's longer than I've even been alive. Caleb and Joshua, who know and believe that God is capable of doing what he can do because it's already been promised to them, they stand there and they wait until one day. 45 years later, a generation has passed. And Joshua now leads the people. He has replaced Moses as their leader. And so Joshua stands there and he's decided now is the time to go into the land that God has promised us all of those years ago. And Caleb, who never let go of the promise, they have this conversation 45 years later. And here's what Caleb says to Joshua. Ready? And now behold, the Lord has kept me alive, as he said, these 45 years. Ever since the Lord spoke this word to Moses while Israel wandered around in the wilderness, and now here I am this day, 85 years old. Now here's what I want to say about that real quick. He's 85. 85 years old. The average life expectancy of a man in America is around 78 years. He's lived 7 years longer than most people. And imagine back then it was even a shorter lifespan. For 85 years. See, most of us when we're 85, do you know what we believe? And I haven't been there. I'm only 40. But most of the people that are 85, they're just kind of holding on. Like they're just waiting, right? You're just kind of in the season where you know it's coming to an end. You're just kind of going through the motions, trying to remember and build memories and all of these things. But you kind of have this belief that your best days are behind you. See, some of us, we believe that faith is a young man's game. We believe that people that can change the world is for the young. And yet here is Caleb at 85 years old. And we said this last week. There's a certain type of despair that sets in when you believe your best days are behind you. But at 85 years old, here's what he knows. Every day and every breath is a gift. And as long as there's still breath in your lungs, there's life to live and there's still new possibility of what God can do. And here's what he says at 85. And yet I am as strong this day, verse 11, this day, as on the day that Moses sent me. Just as my strength was then, so now is my strength for war, both for going out and for coming in. Here's what he's saying. I ain't changed. I'm ready. And here's the line. Now, therefore, give me this mountain of which the Lord spoke in that day. And you know what happens next? he marches in at 85 years old, and they take the land. No matter the odds, no matter the obstacles, no matter the giants, no matter the terrain, and no matter the years, he held on to the promise and the truth of who God was and what God could do. His eyes were squarely focused on who God was and who he believed him to be. Now flash forward a couple thousand years, and Jesus takes his disciples to the base of a mountain. And they're standing there, and we asked last week, have you ever been to the base of a mountain? You ever stood there? I did this week in Guatemala. We were in Antigua, and we're standing there in the village, and there's this giant mountain right on the other side of it, and you're just looking up. And it's so big, you can't even see the top because it's above the clouds. And you're just standing there, and when you're standing there and you're looking at it, you just feel small. And maybe you even feel a little bit insignificant because there's this giant mass of thing. And here's the question. Have you ever stood before a mountain, and not just physically, but a mountain in your life? Just something that seems like, I cannot overcome this. I cannot take this. Like this just seems too big. It seems impossible. We had a girl used to come to church here years ago, and she ran a lot, and she knew I ran. So one day, me and her husband, we went out to run the Bernheim Millennium Trail. It's about 13 miles. And so we're running it, and I'd never done it before. I didn't know anything about it. Now, this particular girl, she used to run mountains for a living, like run them, so she was dumb. And so she was awesome. And so we're running. If you ever done the Millennium Trail, it's just giant hills. And so we're running along, and we get a couple miles in, and we run this big hill, and I'm like dying. Like, I'm an experienced runner, but I'm just dying. And so we run down, and we get about 100 yards of flat, and then we have another hill. And I'm just like, I can't do this. Like, it just felt impossible. And it wasn't even a mountain. It was just a giant hill. Have you ever seen those stories of guys like the free solo guy? I can't think of his name right now. They see mountains, they see cliffs, and they're just like, I'm just going to climb it. Just going to climb it. It's a whole different mindset and perspective, but they believe that obstacle can be overcome. They believe it. And in Matthew chapter 17, Jesus stands with his disciples at the base of a mountain, and here's what he says. I tell you the truth, if you had faith even as small as a mustard seed. Now, mustard seed was not the smallest of the seeds, but it's a tiny seed for what it can actually produce. And he says, if you have faith even that small, you could say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it would move. Nothing would be impossible. Now, when I read this, I love the idea, but then it's a little bit convicting because here's the reality of the question is, how many mountains have you moved recently? And Jesus says, if you have even like this small amount, which here's the next question. So what are these mountains? What are these mountains that we face in life that we need to move, but we're afraid to ask them to move, or we don't have enough faith even as small as a mustard seed? So what are they? Is it a fractured relationship? You ever have a relationship with somebody and you get to this point where you just go, I don't know if we can overcome this. I don't know if it's possible for us to move past this. Or maybe for some of you, the mountain you face is it's a prognosis, right? It's that moment where the doctor sets you down in the chair and they say those words you don't want to hear. Is it like a hole in your heart because of a loved one you've lost and you can't move forward? And you're just kind of like stuck. Is it a fear of the future and the uncertainty? Is it the doubts you have about your ability to persevere? Maybe for some of us, it's this overwhelming sense of anxiety and fear. Maybe for some of us, it's this crippling depression. And it's like this moment where you're standing before the mountain, whatever that is, and you have this moment, you just go, it just seems impossible. It just seems like I don't know if I can overcome that. And what I love about what Jesus teaches here is something pretty astonishing. See, we think, okay, well, there's this mountain in front of us, and if I had like big faith, like if I had faith like that person, or I had faith like that person, or I just had like this big faith where it was out any doubt that people knew that I had faith. If I had this ginormous faith, I could just quote Bible verses all day long, and I only listen to Christian music, and I had every April t-shirt she's ever wore, and the bumper stickers, and all of that stuff. If I had faith that big, then I'd be okay. And Jesus says, no, listen. If you would just muster up that much. Because see, what Jesus understands is sometimes it's not the size of your faith. It's the object of your faith. See, sometimes we face things, if we're honest, and let's be honest. Because see, it's the people that scare me that are facing the hard things that just pretend like it's not even there. Those are scary people. What I'm talking about is when you're facing it and you're going, God, I don't know how I'm going to overcome this. This is really hard. But listen, it's not it's hard. But right now, I can give you this much. Tim Keller says, strong faith in a weak branch is fatally inferior to weak faith in a strong branch. What Jesus understands in this teaching is it's the object sometimes, not the size. Do you not think that Caleb and Joshua had moments where they were like, maybe they're right? But they kept the object of their faith intact. Because they could answer the question that Jesus asked. Well, who do you say that I am? Who do you say that I am? And they had the ability to, even with the obstacles in front of them, to hold on to what Paul tells us, to actually believe, ready, that God is actually for us. He's not against us. And if we can hold on to that even just a little bit. Do you know what's most fascinating about Jesus when he interacts with us here on earth? Jesus, when he's about to do something in someone's life, he'll ask them questions. And the question that Jesus never asks somebody is, well, when was the last time you prayed? And how long was it? Right? You ever been to like one of these things and like, we're going to pray for 12 hours. And I'm like, I'm not. Right? You ever been to one of those? He never asks, like, when was the last time? He never even says, when was the last time you went to church or temple? He never asks anybody, how much money do you give? And he never asks anybody, how good are you? Are you good enough for this? Do you know the question as you read the Gospels almost over and over and over again that Jesus asks people in different forms, but it's almost always the same question? Do you know what he asks them? He asks them, do you believe I can do this? Do you believe that I can do this? And that's the question that you and I have to wrestle with. Do you believe that he can do this? Do you believe, even though you're facing a mountain, that you can muster up this much faith to believe that he can actually do this? Here's what I know. In the last few years, we have been taught that there are still giants in the land. Not only as a country and as a community, but as individuals. There's still obstacles that we're going to face. There's still terrain that we feel like will devour us. We all will face mountains that need moving. And do you believe that he can do it? One of my favorite things about the life and teachings of Jesus is Jesus doesn't just tell us to move mountains. He actually shows us what it's like. High up on the hill of Mount Moriah, Jesus will face a mountain of his own. At a place called Golgotha, on a hill, Jesus demonstrates once and for all how far God will go and just how big of a mountain that he's willing to move. But if you want to know more about that, you'll just have to come back next week. Let's pray. Father God, we love you. We thank you. God, I know that there's many people in this room or in the last service or watching online or listening to this, who knows when, that are facing obstacles, that are facing challenges, that are facing giants, that have mountains in their way that need to be moved. And so my prayer is that you will just give us the strength, even if it's only enough to muster up just a little bit of faith. And a faith that our obstacles do not compare to the object of our faith, which is you. To have that belief that no matter how big the obstacle or the mountain or the giant we face, to believe that you are bigger and mightier, that you are just, you are fair, you are good, and you are for us. And so give us the strength and the wisdom and the peace to believe those truths. God, continue to give us the grace and the mercy that we need, the hope that we need to persevere another day, and another season, another week. And God, may we never lose sight of who you are and the promises that you've made to us. And so we love you and we thank you. In your Son's name we pray. Amen.
At this time, we'd like to invite you to receive communion with us. If you haven't already, you can find that here at the front of the room, which represents Christ's body and blood. And as you receive that, you can take a moment to think about what that means to you and what that means for you.
All these pieces broken and scattered, in mercy gathered, mended and whole, empty-handed but not forsaken, have been set free, have been set free. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. Oh, I once was lost, but now I'm found, was blind, but now I see. Oh, I can see you now. Oh, I can see the love in your eyes, laying yourself down, raising up the broken to life. You take our failures, you take our weakness, you set your treasure in jars of clay. So take this heart, Lord, I'll be your vessel, the world to see alive in me. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. Oh, I once was Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. Oh, I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. Oh, I can see you now. Oh, I can see the love in your eyes. Laying yourself down, raising up the broken to
We have another new one for you today, too.
Your love is like radiant diamonds bursting inside us. We cannot contain your love. Will surely come find us like blazing wildfires. Sing your name, God of mercy, sweet love of mine. I have surrendered to your design. Take this offering stretched across the skies. These hallelujahs be multiplied. Your love is like radiant diamonds bursting inside us. We cannot contain your love. Will surely come find us like blazing wildfires. Sing your name. Come on. God of mercy, sweet love of mine. I have surrendered to your design. May this offering stretch across the skies. These hallelujahs be multiplied. These hallelujahs be multiplied. Your love, radiant diamond, bursting inside us, cannot contain. Your love surely come find us like blazing wildfires. Sing your name. Mercy, sweet love of mine, I have surrendered to your design. May this offering stretch across the sky. These hallelujahs be multiplied. These hallelujahs be multiplied.
Will you have a seat for a second? We have a baptism.
This is Daryl, and he has come to give his life to Christ, and so I'm going to ask you to repeat after me.
I believe Jesus is the Christ, Son of the living God, and I accept him as my Lord and Savior.
Daryl, upon your confession of faith, I baptize you in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
We have one more for you, so let's stand and sing together.
Alone in my sorrow and dead in my skin, lost without hope, no place to begin. Your love made a way, let mercy come in. When death was arrested, my life began. Ash was redeemed, only beauty remains. My orphan heart was given a name. My morning grew quiet, my feet rose to dance.
When death was arrested, my life began.
Oh, your grace, so free, washes over me. You have made me new, now life begins with you. It's your endless love pouring down on us. You have made us new, now life begins with you. Released from my chains, I'm a prisoner no more. My shame was a ransom he faithfully bore. He canceled my debt and he called me his friend. When death was arrested, my life began. Oh, your grace, so free, washes over me. You have made me new, now life begins with you.
Darkness rejoices, though heaven had lost.
Let's sing this out.
But then Jesus arose with our freedom in it. That's when death was arrested and my life began. That's when death was arrested and my life began. Oh, your grace so free washes over me. You have made me new. Now life begins with you. It's your endless love pouring down on us. You have made us new. Now life begins with you. Oh, we're free, free, forever we're free. Come join the song, all the redeemed. Yes, we're free, free, forever, amen. Death was arrested and my life began. When death was arrested and my life began. When death was arrested and my life began.
Thank you so much for being here and worshiping with us today. We'll see you next week, and don't forget Saturday.
That's right.
Saturday's Fall
Yep.
Festival, so it's going
We'll
to be
see
a
you
good
there.
time. Yeah.